My lover got out of bed and headed to his adjoining hotel room to get ready for a new day. We always booked 2 adjoining rooms with an internal connecting door to avoid suspicion. It wouldn't be good if our affair was found out. I was Dan's executive assistant. We had worked together for a little over 2 years and had been lovers for most of that time. Because of my role, we had to work closely together and often traveled across the country to other offices, meeting with clients and attending industry sales conferences. This gave us ample opportunity to be together without arousing any suspicion. Yes, I was married and my husband stayed at home. My marriage was something of a shotgun wedding. When I was only 18 years old and in high school dating my first boyfriend Alan, one night when my parents weren't home, one thing happened and soon after I discovered I was pregnant. By the time we confessed to our parents, it was too late to do anything but have the baby. My parents were furious and insisted that I adopt the baby. His parents wanted us to keep him and even offered to take care of him while we finished school. Alan stayed with me throughout the pregnancy even though we got a lot of nasty comments from other students and teachers, such as that I was a slut. Alan often fought with other boys who insulted me and was even suspended for a while. The labor was horrible, but he was by my side the whole time. Finally, 2 days after my 19th birthday, we welcomed our gorgeous baby girl. As we held Lauren in our arms, we realized there was no way we were giving her to anyone else. At first, my parents practically disowned me, so we moved in with Alan's parents and became parents to the baby ourselves. True to their word, his parents did a lot of raising Lauren. When we graduated, we both got jobs, got married in a simple ceremony, and moved into our tiny house of our own. Our plans for the future, going to university, had to be put on hold as another mistake resulted in Lauren having a sister whom we named Emma. To cut a long story short, through hard work, parental endeavors, and parental support over the next decade, we both earned university degrees while working part-time, alternating between studying and working. At the same time, we managed to raise 2 wonderful daughters. We were very much in love with each other. Alan loved his 2 girls very much and they were very close. My relationship with them was a mess. At times, I felt resentful towards them. I guess I subconsciously blamed them for me not having the life I had planned for myself at that age. After graduation, I took a job as executive assistant to Dan Johnson, the business development manager for a medical device company. I was 32 at the time and he was 41. Dan and I hit it off great from the start. We quickly became a formidable professional team. I loved my job, sales were growing, management was happy, and gave me a raise. I finally felt like I had a real normal life. My job involved quite a bit of traveling with overnight stays, sometimes alone but more often with my boss Dan. It was a lot of fun traveling to new places around the country, meeting with clients, negotiating deals, and interacting with high-level executives. I was having a fantastic experience and I loved it. I was away from home about 3 weeks out of every 4. The travel schedule could be anything from 1 or 2 nights to an entire week and sometimes on weekends. While the work and traveling were wonderful, it meant that I was away from my husband and girls a lot. Alan had to take on most of the child-rearing responsibilities. Dan and I spent a lot of time together and got to know each other very well. Despite the age difference, he was married around the same time as me and had 3 younger children. So that Alan wouldn't be too concerned about me traveling with my boss, I lied to him that I mostly traveled alone or with another woman. I also told him that while professionally my boss and I worked well together, personally he was a bit of an asshole and I didn't like him. In fact, my boss was great and I was fascinated by him and also very attracted to him. I loved spending time in his company. When we traveled together, we had a habit of finding cozy little restaurants where we would have dinner, sip wine, and chat for hours. One evening, about 6 months after I joined the firm, Dan and I received a particularly large sales order that day. To celebrate, we ordered a special dinner and a bottle of expensive French champagne. After we sat facing each other, feeling both elated and a little fuzzy from the champagne and delicious dinner, he reached out and placed his hand on top of mine. Looking deeply into my eyes, he said, "You know, Amy, that I'm very much in love with you." My heart raced and I couldn't get a word out. After what seemed like an eternity, but was actually about 15 seconds, he stood up and held out his hand to me. I hesitated for a moment, then took his hand and stood up. He silently led me to his room. Once in the room, we got down to it. Our flight home wasn't until late morning, so we ordered breakfast. On the way home, I felt guilty for being an unfaithful wife. Justifying myself, I thought that I hadn't had the opportunity to spread my wings with other men when I was young, and I deserved at least one experience. In any case, my husband was right to neglect me, for our sex life had never recovered from the difficult first years of marriage. I realized that I had been so engrossed in Dan the night before that I hadn't called Emma to wish her a happy birthday. She had just turned 11 and was growing up rapidly. I looked at Dan sitting next to me on the plane, and he smiled back and squeezed my hand. I realized that despite the guilt and the fact that it was wrong, I had gotten involved. When I got home, the guilt came over me again. Alan was very happy to see me after a week away, but I shied away from his hugs and kisses. Likewise, later that night when he wanted to make love, I pulled him away, pleading tiredness. I was tired, but I was also very sore from the workout Dan had given me. It was the first time I'd ever turned Alan down. Back to the present. Our affair, which started 18 months ago, continued non-stop. Over time, I got over the guilt and hid my secret from Alan, blocking out some of my emotions when I was at home. At the time, I didn't realize how much I was emotionally disconnecting from Alan and my girls. My thoughts were always about Dan and when we could be together again. Lying to cover it up had become second nature, and I didn't feel so guilty anymore. I had fallen hopelessly in love with Dan, and every now and then I would think about leaving Alan to be with him. Our company was expanding and we started traveling more often for work. Sometimes when there were no work trips scheduled for the week, we would arrange a fictitious business trip with an overnight stay and go spend the night in a hotel in a neighboring town. We also sometimes went on short vacations together to celebrate anniversaries and birthdays, using the excuse of attending a conference in a remote location. The conference was always conveniently located at a beautiful beach resort far from home. We chose locations where the conference actually took place so that we had an alibi. We were exceptionally neat at work, and we developed a consistent game face that behaved very professionally when other people were around. We never sneaked off anywhere to meet together, had lunch at different times, came and went from work at different times, etc. We started secret email accounts outside of the system and only communicated through them. We never met in our town. If we had to socialize at office events, it was only in large groups. We never sat together or chatted one-on-one. I usually called home at the end of the day at a time that was convenient for me, so I wouldn't be interrupted or caught off guard. I never told Alan where I was staying, and he never asked. At home, I argued with my husband about my hard-headed boss and having to travel so often and work so hard. He often asked why I wouldn't find another job with a nice boss and less travel. I simply told him that I was learning too much and being paid too much to leave. At the rare work events where partners were to be present, we were very careful about our facial expressions and emotions. I would introduce my husband to my boss and he would introduce his wife to us. We always made sure to have a polite chat and then moved on to talk to other coworkers. After that, we never looked at each other. In general, we covered our tracks carefully. No one ever suspected anything. My husband Alan was happy that I was doing well at work, but at the same time he was annoyed that I was away from home so much and most of the child rearing fell on his shoulders, on top of his own job as an IT consultant. Of course, I still loved my husband, even though I noticed that we were drifting apart. He always seemed to be busy with the girls and work. I realized with guilt that our affection had dwindled. I made a mental note that I would try to make it up to him. Alan's story: we had a rough start in life early on, having our first child at 16, getting married at 18, and having another shortly thereafter. Through hard work and teamwork, we managed to graduate from university. Me with a degree in information technology and Amy with a degree in commerce, while raising 2 girls. We ignored the difficulties because we loved each other so much. When Amy got her first professional job after graduation about 2 years ago, she was over the moon, and I was very proud of her. At last, we were both working professionally, earning a good salary, and could start enjoying a normal life together. At first, I supported her career in every way I could, but I grew increasingly resentful of the hours she worked and the amount of traveling she did. She left home around 7 in the morning and usually didn't get home until 6 or 7 in the evening. Most weeks she would be gone for work for at least 1 or 2 nights, sometimes more, and sometimes she wouldn't get home until Saturday afternoon. When she was home during the week, she either worked after dinner or just sat in front of the TV. On Saturdays, she would sleep late and then go shopping. On Sundays, she would go to the gym in the morning and then have lunch with her girlfriends. She was usually too tired to go out with me in the evening. We didn't spend much family time together. She was always too busy at work to take vacations, so the girls and I often vacationed without her. I noticed that her character was changing. The loving wife and mother was gone, replaced by a selfish, often irritated and aloof occupant of the house in my bed. Whenever I tried to bring it up, I was immediately rebuffed. She would say it was just my imagination, or I was tired at work, or I was working hard for us, or we were fine, etc. I was worried about how it might end. At the end of her first year, I was required to accompany her to a Christmas party at the CEO's mansion. It was there that I first met her boss, Dan, as well as his wife. We chatted politely but briefly about nothing. Then he bowed out and they went off to socialize. My wife led me to the others and started a conversation with other employees. Later, I suddenly thought it was a bit odd. Her boss seemed to be quite a friendly man, though a bit reserved, but not the ogre Amy had made him out to be. Dan's wife was also very pleasant. Since Amy was his executive assistant, I figured we would have more than just polite cursory conversation. I also sensed that Amy was a little tense. She had a habit of talking really fast when she was nervous, and it gave her away. I thought it was odd that she was nervous around her boss when they worked so closely together. It was perplexing to me. Although I trusted her completely, I still put the thought aside for later. Over the next year, I was very busy as I decided to start my own IT consulting company. In addition, I was practically single-handedly raising our girls. So I pushed all concerns about Amy to the back burner. As for life with Amy, it was a repeat of the previous year. She started traveling even more often and becoming more and more distant from all three of us. Lately, I began to notice that her attitude toward me was becoming condescending and dismissive. She showed me no love, no affection, nothing. Only occasionally I received something without any love or intimacy. It was obvious that our relationship was crumbling. At the end of the year, I again attended her staff Christmas party. Our interaction with her boss was a repeat of the previous meeting. Afterward, a fleeting thought crossed my mind that she was hiding something. For the first time since we met at 18, I began to doubt her. Was there another man in her life? The thought was almost overwhelming. We had fought together as a team, overcoming many challenges to get where we were now. She wouldn't do that, would she? What was I supposed to do? I didn't go to the extreme of hiring a private investigator or hacking into her computer, but I began to observe her more closely. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Either it was my imagination or she was very clever at covering her tracks. Either way, all was not well between us. I guess I was just too busy to bother. Meanwhile, my girls were growing up rapidly. We spent a lot of time together and were very close, although unfortunately their mother had little time for them. Both girls were avid soccer players, so every Saturday morning during the season I went to watch them play. It was the highlight of my week. After the game, we would go out for lunch somewhere, usually to their favorite Japanese restaurant, and chat about what they were doing. I noticed that they almost never mentioned their mother. Afterwards, depending on the weather, we would walk on the beach, go to the movies, or go out with friends. After the first game of the season was over, Emma came up to me accompanied by a new member of the soccer team. She was a charming girl, tall, absolutely beautiful, with a wide smile, long dark hair, and deep dark brown eyes. She was also very athletic and had distinguished herself in her first game with Emma's team, scoring 2 goals. "Hi, Daddy, this is Callie. Can I come over and hang out with her this afternoon?" "Hi, Callie, nice to meet you." "Sure, Emma, as long as Callie's parents don't mind." Callie turned and called out, "Mom, can Emma come over this afternoon?" The woman, obviously Callie's mom, turned and started walking toward us. Holy crap. She was the adult version of her daughter and absolutely stillborn beautiful. She introduced herself as Sophie. She readily agreed to have Emma come to her house in the afternoon. We chatted for a while, but I'm still not sure exactly what I said. I know I babbled incoherently. After they left, both my girls burst into laughter at my embarrassment and then smirked at each other. In the evening, Emma reported that Sophie was very nice. She was a single mom since Callie's father had died in a car accident about 3 years ago. Sophie single-handedly raised Callie and her younger brother Tom for 11 years. The fact that she was a single mom definitely caught my attention. The following Saturday, as Lauren and I were watching Emma play soccer, Sophie and her son came up to us and asked if they could watch with us. I mentally prepared myself to meet her again and was determined not to look so stupid again. We chatted during the game. She had recently moved to town for a new job and didn't know many people yet. She was very happy that Callie had met a new friend in Emma and complimented me on my good manners. After the match, Emma asked if Callie could come to our house. Sure, Emma, that would be great if that's okay with you. Sophie, sure. Why don't Callie come over now and have lunch with us? Do you like sushi? Yes, I love it. Great, it's a deal. In fact, why don't all three of you have lunch with us? I muttered. Thank you so much for the invitation, Alan, but I'll be in the way of your family, so I won't be coming. I was feeling a little overwhelmed when Lauren spoke up. No, please come, Sophie. It would be really nice to have you with us, and I'd get a woman to talk to for a change. You would be absolutely out of the way. Please. She looked at me. If you're sure I won't get in the way, Alan, that would be wonderful. I shook my head and mumbled something incoherent again. As we turned to walk to our cars, Lauren turned to me with a smirk and winked. Lunch was a great success. We, meaning mostly 4 girls, chatted for almost 2 hours. I think Tom was glad of the other man's company, and we talked a bit amongst ourselves about computers and soccer. At one point, I heard Sophie very casually ask my girls if their mom ever came to watch their soccer games. Lauren's answer surprised me. No, never. She's not really interested in us. She's only interested in her work and herself. Daddy is our mom too. He's the only one who cares about us. Sophie cast an inquisitive glance at me. During the rest of the soccer season, we got into the habit of having lunch together after every game. Emma and Callie became close friends and alternated between our houses after the game and sometimes after school. Sometimes Tom would come over with his sister too, but more often than not he wanted to spend time with me. We often fiddled with computers, kicked a ball around, or rode bikes. I also noticed that Lauren often stopped by Sophie's house, and the two of them would sometimes go shopping and then stop for coffee and a chat. I noticed that my girls never mentioned Sophie to their mother, and neither did I. Sophie and I were becoming firm friends too. Since I was pretty much a single parent like her, it was much easier for us to help each other with parenting. After soccer season ended, we were increasingly alone with the kids on Saturdays when they went on their own field trips or to visit friends. When my wife wasn't usually around, I was pretty much free. So increasingly, Sophie and I spent that time in each other's company, walking, eating lunch, or watching movies. I looked forward to our meetings more and more and realized that I had fallen in love with her. Despite this, we never crossed the line of friendship. One day, over a cup of coffee with Sophie, I told her that I appreciated her spending time with Lauren. You know, she's never quiet about you when she gets home. Sophie this, Sophie that, I laughed. Well, and Tom is never quiet about you when he comes to see you. Alan this, Alan that, she laughed back. Seriously, he needs a male figure in his life. So I appreciate you spending time with him. Then she suddenly said, forgive me for being blunt, Alan, but it seems pretty obvious that all is not well between you and your wife. We never discussed Amy, carefully avoiding the subject. I sat in silence for about 30 seconds. It was a question I had long pushed to the back of my mind and avoided discussing. The truth is, Sophie, if it weren't for the girls, I'd probably be long gone. Things have been really bad for a few years now. I've tried to talk to her many times, but I've hit a brick wall. Our marriage was hard from the beginning. I think Lauren told you about how Amy and I got married. Yes, and she blames herself a bit for putting you in that situation. I know it's crazy, and I tell her it's not her fault in the slightest. That opened the floodgates for me. I spent the next hour pouring out all my sorrows on Sophie. At the end, she came over and gave me a big hug. It was my first real female hug in forever. I'm here for you whenever you need me, Alan. You know that. I only hugged her tighter and didn't let her go. Soon another year was over, and the annual Christmas party for Amy's coworkers came around again. My reacquaintance with her boss was very similar to the previous 2 years. This time I was on high alert. Although Amy and her boss seemed much more at ease than before, something was not right. I had a definite suspicion about these two. Toward the end of the evening, Amy excused herself to go to the bathroom. After a minute, I looked over and realized that her boss was also nonchalantly heading upstairs. I decided to follow her and went upstairs looking for her. She wasn't in the bathroom, so I looked all around the huge house and was about to pass the ajar bedroom door when I heard my wife's voice inside. "Merry Christmas, dear." A male voice replied, "Merry Christmas, my love." I peeked through the crack of the door and saw Amy and her boss kissing long and passionately, with their arms wrapped around each other. I quickly backed away in shock. I went downstairs pondering what to do. I was beyond angry, feeling just dead. I don't have a temper, so instead of an immediate confrontation, I calmed myself down and decided to investigate and make a plan of action first. Amy returned shortly afterward, a little out of breath, and spent the rest of the evening pretending to be my loving wife. I, on the other hand, pretended that nothing had happened. By New Year's Eve, working while Amy slept, I hacked into her phone and laptop. Amy should have known better. Keeping evidence on your personal computer, even if it's really well hidden, isn't very smart when your husband's occupation is computer hacking. My worst fears were realized. There was a trail of evidence in her work, personal, and secret email accounts. Amy was in a long-term affair with her boss that began over 2 years ago. I also discovered photos and videos showing the depth of her betrayal. From their email correspondence, I realized that Amy and Dan had even discussed leaving their partners to be together. She seemed interested, but her lover was more cautious. I really was a dumb and clueless husband. I installed a covert surveillance program in her phone and laptop. I could remotely monitor her every electronic and physical move if I wanted to. My marriage was clearly over. Now I needed to retain custody of my daughters and protect my business and finances. In the new year, I consulted with a divorce attorney. She told me that divorces are no fault, so you can't sue for adultery. However, in a child custody case, once the children turn 14, they have the right to decide which parent they want to live with after the marriage breaks up. She also came up with a strategy to protect my company from financial payouts in a divorce. Emma will turn 14 in 6 months. Until then, I could tolerate living with Amy, and that gave me time to prepare. To make it work, I had to keep everything a secret from Amy. I told Sophie what I had found out and she cried. It was unexpected. I thought I should be the one most upset and in need of a hug. I held her against me for a while and she tearfully began to tell me that her husband had been murdered while driving with his secretary. When she went through his belongings after his death, she discovered that they had been having an affair. This made his loss all the more difficult. When she recovered, we talked some more, and I told her about my plans to leave Amy. She only grinned. To put my plans into action, I first convinced my wife that since we were both making good money now, we should sell our small house and rent a bigger place while we looked for our dream home. We would use the money from the sale to put a down payment on a new house. She readily agreed. Our house sold very quickly and we rented another place nearby. I was a tenant on a lease for only 6 months. I was very sick of sharing a bed with Amy when she was home. When we moved into rental housing, I got a bad cold. I used that as an excuse to move into the spare room so I wouldn't have to give it to her. I never moved back in after that and she never commented on it. Maybe she didn't notice or maybe she just liked it. Then I talked my father, whom I also confided in, into starting a new IT company that he himself owned. I was his only employee. I then closed my own company and started running my business through his company. Everything was going according to plan until I ran into a very nervous and scared Lauren. Lauren was dating her first boyfriend and I immediately thought she was pregnant, just like what happened to her mom. Dad, this is hard for me to tell you, but Mom is having an affair with her boss. I was shocked that she knew and was speechless for a moment. Really? What makes you think that? Well, right after we moved, Emma and I went back to our old house to pick up some things she'd forgotten. Mom and her boss were there. Well, that's a little weird, but it doesn't prove anything. I said, I know about their affair, Lauren. I've known for a long time. Then why don't you do something about this cheating girl? Emma saw her too? Yes. I called out to Emma, who was hiding with an earshot around the corner, and she bashfully entered the room. I hugged them both tightly. I knew how awful it was for them to see this, especially young Emma. Can you both keep a very big secret? They nodded. I plan on leaving you soon, Mom. I'm just waiting until Emma turns 14 so you both can legally choose who to live with. With you. They both shouted in unison. It won't be easy to keep this secret, but until then, we mustn't do anything to alert your mother. They smiled conspiratorially. Afterwards, I asked Sophie to have a chat with Lauren. She had her first boyfriend now, and I didn't want her to follow in her mother's footsteps. Fortunately, Amy didn't show up as often, so we could tolerate her occasional presence and keep our secret. We enjoyed it even more when she wasn't home, knowing that the end was near. We spent more and more time with Sophie and her 2 children, often having lunch at each other's houses or going out together. One Friday afternoon, when my wife was supposedly at a conference all weekend but was actually with her boss at the hotel, Lauren said, "Daddy, I'm going to babysit Sophie today." "Oh, really? What's she doing?" "Going to dinner with a guy at Brazier Paris, that classy French restaurant in town." I immediately felt real jealousy and tried unsuccessfully not to show it. My daughter looked at me with a pitying expression on her face. "She's going on a date with you, you idiot. It's about time you two went on a proper date. I've already made reservations, so call her now and ask her out properly," holding out her phone to me. "What if she doesn't want to go on a date with me? We're just friends after all. I don't want her to feel awkward. How you managed to be smart enough to graduate from university is beyond me. Call her now." I called, and Sophie, judging by the sound of my voice, was absolutely thrilled and immediately agreed. Somehow I got the feeling that it wasn't a surprise. It took me 3 tries that night before my girls were satisfied that I was appropriately dressed for dinner. Just as I was about to leave, Callie and Tom walked in. In response to my perplexed look, Lauren said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that they'll be spending the night here tonight. So don't worry about coming home late or not at all if you want." She smiled and handed me an already packed overnight bag. All of our children were obviously involved in a determined plot. When I arrived, Sophie met me at the door. Oh my God, she looked absolutely amazing. "Well, say something, Alan." "I can't. I have no words." "Do you like it?" she asked, twisting around herself. "Oh, much more than like it, Sophie. I had the best dinner of my life, and we had a wonderful time in each other's company." At the end of the evening, as we walked up to the front door of her house, I said, "I know our children have arranged for me to stay the night, but you don't have to." She said, "Sure, I'm counting on you to stay," and led me inside and into her bedroom. I wasn't going to argue with that. We were a little shy and hesitant at first. I let out all my mental frustrations and felt like I had died and gone to heaven. The next morning, we heard the sound of lots of feet on the stairs, voices outside, and a knock on the bedroom door, which then opened. Lauren poked her head inside. "Good morning, you two. It's almost 10 and we got tired of waiting, so we came in. Breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Oh, and I'd ask if you had a good evening, but judging by the look on your face, there's no need." She grinned. Laughter was heard outside the door, and they all departed. How did we manage to get such a wonderful group of children, Sophie? The breakfast they made was delicious, and it was wonderful to spend it as a family. Later at home, I tried to justify myself to my girls for what had happened between Sophie and me. After all, technically I had been unfaithful to their mother. They both just rolled their eyes and laughed at my awkwardness. "Dad, it's about time you were happy again. You're not married to Mom anymore anyway. She left you a long time ago, so what are all you co-conspirators up to?" Actually, we're all in agreement. Emma and I need a mother, and Cassie and Tom need a father. You and Sophie are made for each other, so everyone wins. Even if I thought it was a good idea, Sophie might not. Papa truth. Even you should be able to tell how she feels about you and what she wants. Do I have any say in the matter? No, absolutely none, Daddy. From the looks on their faces, they were thoroughly amused by all of this. Now I was truly at the mercy of my daughters. A few days later at dinner, When we were all gathered together, I announced that I intended to go house hunting the following weekend. Sophie asked what kind of house I was looking for. I wanted to be close to the beach, 2 stories with a large family room, a kids' escape room, a large backyard, and a pool. It should have at least 6 bedrooms in case my family ever grows, because you never know. Looking directly at her, I said, I also want to make sure it will appeal to the woman I might fall head over heels in love with. Sophie stared back for a full minute, then walked over to where I was sitting and kissed me passionately in front of the children. When we took a breath, they watched us in silence and then exploded with joy, dancing around us. I took that as a yes. After weeks of searching, we found the perfect place. We decided to buy it jointly. She used her husband's life insurance money, and I used the proceeds from the sale of my house as collateral. Everything was ready for a showdown with Amy. As Emma's 14th birthday and thus D-Day approached, Amy announced that she was leaving for 7 days to attend a sales conference on the West Coast. I later checked her email and discovered that she was actually going on vacation with her boss to celebrate their 3rd wedding anniversary on the island of Bali in Indonesia. To avoid arousing suspicion at work, they independently told everyone that they were going on vacation with their families because they were working so hard that they were neglecting them. She would leave work a day earlier than her boss and fly to Bali alone. He would fly in a day later. She would come back to work a day earlier than her boss to make the script look believable. They were getting lazy. Their gimmicks weren't up to their usual standards, as the whole thing could easily unravel if someone checked. Amy flew off to her conference, and we immediately started packing and moving our things to our new home, where Sophie and the kids had moved a month earlier. The Balinese god of vengeance, if there is such a thing, was really smiling down on me. The same night Amy arrived, Agung volcano, an active volcano in Bali, began erupting in full force, spewing clouds of volcanic dust into the air. All air travel in and out of Bali was immediately suspended. Her lover stayed home and Amy was stuck in Bali alone to celebrate their wedding anniversary. This is impossible to make up. I laughed so hard I almost peed my pants. The volcano continued to erupt and all flights were still cancelled, separating the lovers. Behind the scenes, I checked her emails and messages every day to amuse myself. The lovers were not happy at camp and Amy was very resentful of Dan, as if it was his fault. Every once in a while Amy would call home and tell me how busy she was at a conference and blah blah blah. Typically, I would ask her how things were going at the hotel and ask questions about the city she was supposedly in. When I later gained remote access to her laptop, it turned out that during the phone call, she had been frantically searching the internet for information to come up with plausible answers. Meanwhile, all 6 of us were settling into our new home. I had my attorney file a separation document with the family court. I also obtained temporary custody of my girls from the court after filing their signed statements that they wanted to live with me. As the day of Amy's return approached, all flights were canceled and I wondered how Amy would handle the situation. She called me one evening and told me that she had made a lot of connections with potential big sales leads at the conference and her boss had asked her to follow up with them right away before she returned home. I could tell she was very nervous. It's also a good thing she didn't call on the video link or I wouldn't have been able to contain myself. I just assured Amy that we were fine and I understood. Another week went by and she was still stuck in Bali. I saw frantic emails and texts between the 2 lovers. Her boss informed everyone at work that she had to extend her vacation due to a family emergency. Her boss also called me and deeply apologized for causing Amy to be away from home for so long, but it was a big opportunity, vital to the company, blah blah blah. I waited for his call and was ready to answer like a dutiful husband to an important working wife. I assured him that I was fine and understood. I then innocently asked him where Amy was going. He began to quickly think of places. I read Amy his letter letting her know where she needed to be. My strategy, of course, was to make her squirm and plant the seeds of doubt in her mind that she had been discovered. I kept assuring my wife when she called that I understood everything but kept asking her about interesting places in the cities where she was staying. I knew she had researched everything beforehand, so I always asked her a few unexpected trick questions and enjoyed her attempts to give herself away. I was just playing dumb. During one call I said, "Hey Amy, did you read about those poor people who are stranded in Bali and can't get home because of the volcano?" There was a moment of silence, then I replied, "Oh yeah, but I didn't pay much attention to it on the news. One of my coworkers was stuck there for 2 weeks. Do you remember Paul Howard and his wife? We met them about 6 months ago. Oh yes, we're working on a project together and he has to do his part of the work remotely via the internet from his hotel in Nusa Dua. At least the Grand Hyatt isn't a bad place to be stuck. Amy's squeak was heard on the line. Sure enough, it was the hotel she was staying at. Paul hadn't even been to Bali, but she didn't know that. Immediately after the call, she'd moved to a cheap hotel on the other side of the island. She must have prayed she could get away with it. Of course, my 5 girls and son thought the whole farce was hilarious. Yes, Sophie's children were mine now. Finally, after almost 3 weeks, the volcano stopped erupting and flights from Bali resumed. Amy called me to tell me that her work was over and she would be back on Friday afternoon. I was waiting for her from the airport at our rented and now vacant house. I had planned this meeting very carefully. When she walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She looked tired and very nervous. Oddly enough, for someone who had been in business for 3 weeks, she had a deep tan. I didn't bother with the usual kiss on the cheek. Wow, you got a great tan on your business trip? Did you even have time to do anything? She babbled something, blushing. Sit down and have a glass of wine with me. I poured wine into my glass and took a sip. Alan, I'm tired. I just want to go upstairs, take a shower, and rest before dinner. I'm sorry, but we have something to discuss and it can't wait, so please sit down. The girls are staying the night at a friend's house, so we won't be disturbed. The look on Amy's face expressed genuine fear. She thought her game was finally over and I was about to lower the boom. But she didn't know how to do it. She reluctantly sat down and I poured her a glass. I'd rehearsed this speech many times and honed the apologetic face. You know, things haven't been smooth between us for a long time, Amy. Do you know why? She looked startled and only mumbled a no. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Amy, but I can't sugarcoat it. The truth is that I've met another woman. I love her and I want to be with her. That's why I've decided to leave you to be with her. In an instant, a sudden shock struck her and the frightened expression on her face was replaced by wordless rage. I continued, still apologizing. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's just that you were away so often and I got lonely. How dare you do this to me, Alan? After all I've done for you, who is she? I assume you're entertaining her. Blah, blah, blah. I just sat there with a sorrowful face while she poured a dregs of water on me for about 5 minutes. I can see that you're very angry and that's understandable. It's pointless to continue the conversation now. I'll come back tomorrow around 4 o'clock in the afternoon to talk some more. We have a lot to discuss. I left that tirade and walked back to my new home. A string of angry text messages and voicemails followed me. I didn't bother to respond. Back home, everyone was wondering how it went. My response, even better than expected. For dinner, we had pizza and watched a movie together. The girls turned off their phones to avoid communicating with their mother, even though I made it clear to them that they could not cut off contact with her. Why didn't I attack her for her cheating? Because it would have hurt her so much more that way. That night, Sophie and I made tender love. All my anxiety and tension just melted away. Amy, who? The next afternoon, I showed up at my old place, armed with a folder of papers. I was greeted by a still very annoyed Amy, along with her best friend Claire, who was a lawyer and whom I had never liked. I saw old emails where Claire had encouraged Amy to continue the affair in the early days when Amy was feeling guilty and thinking about breaking up. I sat down at the table facing both of them. Claire appeared to be the spokesperson, and offense was the best form of defense. She proceeded to tell me at length what an asshole I was and what a wonderful wife and mother Amy was. How I had taken advantage of her while she was away and worked so hard for the family. How I should beg her to come back. If I didn't, she would clean me out in the divorce, take the girls, and I would never see them again. What hypocrites. After last night, they apparently decided that if I knew about her affair with her boss, I would have brought it up. I kept a sad, apologetic, and questioning look on my face. Amy, I realize how much this hurts you, but I guess I'm a little surprised that you're so angry. For quite some time, I haven't felt like you really loved me. You've been physically and emotionally absent from our marriage for the last 3 years. That's utter nonsense, Alan. Of course I've been around. I know I work hard, which often distracts me from my work, but I did it for us. So tell me, Amy, when was the last time we made love? Amy remained silent. I can tell you it was 3 years ago. Yes, we have sex very rarely, but I was talking about making love. I can tell you the exact date of the last time. Remember, 3 years ago you were away on a business trip and forgot to call Emma on her 11th birthday. She tried to call you several times throughout the evening but never got through. She was so upset. I remember it well because Emma's birthday was 2 weeks ago when you were on a business trip and you forgot to call her again. So I thought it was a bad anniversary for us. She threw me a guilty look. Ever since you came home from that trip 3 years ago, somehow our relationship has never been the same. I've always wondered why that's the case. I realized from the look on their faces that I had hit the mark. They looked very uncomfortable and squinted at each other. After all, Amy, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for about 6 months now. It doesn't seem to bother you. I can't remember the last time we went out together or went on vacation. Feels like you spend your vacations at work. They both shuddered. When you're home, you're not here with me and your girls. I smiled inwardly as I watched them squirm in their seats. Anyway, Amy, I'm sorry, but I'm going to move on with my life and I hope for the girls' sake we can make our separation as easy as possible. Reconciliation is really impossible. Who is she? Do I know her? You've met her daughter Callie, Emma's best friend, a few times. Her mom Sophie and I met at Saturday soccer last year and became friends. I think our friendship grew until we realized we were in love with each other. We had an affair and recently decided to move in together. Before they could say anything else, I placed a large index folder on the table. I've gathered some documents and information for you. Tab A is the separation agreement I filed with the court 2 weeks ago. Tab B is the divorce petition you need to sign. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move forward. Tab C is the proposed financial settlement. Tab D is the new lease on this house. The lease expires in 3 weeks, so you will have to renew it in your name if you want to stay. Tab D is all the utility contracts. I gave notice to terminate the agreement in 3 weeks. If you want to stay, you will have to renew them in your name. Tab E, bank statements. I have withdrawn 60% of the funds from our joint accounts. The credit cards in your name now belong to you. Finally, Tab F is a temporary court order for custody and child support. The girls have decided to move in with me, so custody will be handled by me. Child support will be paid directly from your paycheck at work. Access to visitation has been left open so we can work this out as we see fit. They were stunned that I was so well prepared. Claire began, "You bastard, you've been planning this for ages. You're not going to get away with this. We're going to take your IT company, your girls, and your money." Well, yeah, I've been planning this since Christmas. I had a waking moment at your staff Christmas party. Amy. I realized it was over between us and it was time to act. I watched Amy frantically trying to remember what had happened there. "So selling the house to buy another was a sham," Claire said. I only smiled. "As for screwing me, Claire, I don't have a company to take over. I closed it down a few months ago. I work for someone else now. I bought a new house for Sophie to live in after I filed for legal separation. So it's not an asset to our marriage. Since I have legal custody of the girls, I can use 60% of the money from the sale of the house to buy a new home. So I'm not sure what you can really do, Claire. By the way, if you research state laws, you'll find that once the children turn 14, they can choose who they want to live with. They chose me. You really are nothing, Alan. I bet you poisoned the girls' minds against Amy. I wouldn't do that. I'm not such a scoundrel. Anyway, even if I thought I should poison them, it wouldn't have been necessary. Amy did it herself, having neglected them for the last 3 years. You have a lot of work to do with them, Amy, to get them back. It's important for their well-being that they have a good relationship with their mother. She hasn't neglected them. She's a good mother. It's not what they think, Claire. She's been virtually absent from their lives for years. Amy, ask yourself, who feeds them? Who takes them to sports? Who makes their school lunches? Who helps them with their homework? Who buys them clothes? Who always remembers their birthdays and buys them presents? Who goes to the movies with them? Who they go to with problems? Who help them get through their first period? Who gives them love and affection? I could go on and on. Well, Amy fell silent. It was obvious that she was having a hard time digesting what had happened. The girls asked me to ask if you would meet them tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the beachside cafe. It was actually my idea since they don't really want to meet you. I'll tell them it's okay. She only nodded. I left them both and went back to my family. The next day, the girls told me that Amy kept bad-mouthing me and demanding that they live with her. Eventually, the girls excused themselves to go to the bathroom and just quietly left. I couldn't understand why she wanted to make up. She had been indifferent to me for years. Maybe I was just a convenient babysitter and housekeeper for her. Amy, the aftermath. When Alan told me he was leaving me for another woman, I was in complete shock. How could he? I thought he loved me. Despite several attempts to talk to him about reconciliation, he wanted nothing to do with me, and we only communicated when we picked up and dropped off my daughters for visits. My girls were openly feuding with me, and the time spent with them was unpleasant. When I left them at home after a visit, they would happily run to their new stepmother and hug her to purposely piss me off. Eventually, I told them not to come to my house unless they wanted to themselves. I had always envisioned my life continuing as it had before, with my lover to pleasure me on the road and my husband to take care of me at home. The shock and emotional devastation of Alan actually leaving me was immense. Several months passed, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that while it was a huge surprise, it wasn't meant to be. Alan was right. I had been an absent wife in many ways. For the last 3 years, I had concentrated all my love, all my emotional intimacy on Dan. There was almost nothing left for him. I realized that the only real surprise was that he stayed so long. I couldn't afford my house payment and child support, so I had to move into a tiny old apartment. I spent nights at home alone, watching TV and eating crappy takeout food. Dan's attitude also changed when Alan left me. He was suddenly too busy with his family to spend much time with me, even though I was now a free woman and always available. He sent me on business trips alone more and more often, telling me that I could handle the clients on my own now. When we were together, the emotional connection seemed to disappear. About 6 months into the marriage breakup, Dan announced that he was quitting his job and moving to another firm in another city. I tearfully asked him to never contact me again. In the blink of an eye, I became a divorced woman. I couldn't help but think of a line from a Joni Mitchell song. Doesn't it seem like you don't know what you've got until it's gone? I foolishly thought I could have my cake and eat it too. Nor did it help my confidence that Alan was now with a gorgeous woman who was so sweet it was impossible to hate her. He was outright glowing with happiness with his new partner. I remember he looked the same way with me when we were young parents trying to raise 2 kids. No matter what challenges we faced, we fought together to overcome them and were happy and in love. How could I have let that crumble? My 2 girls seemed much happier too. They treated Sophie as their mother, not me. I was just an annoying relic of their past that they were forced to visit occasionally. It was very painful. I think I hit rock bottom when I complained to my girls about my situation. Lauren looked at me coldly. So, did you leave your father after all? I know I wasn't the perfect wife and was a little neglectful of all of you, but he was the one who left me for another woman. Mom, he left you because you had an affair with your boss for 3 years. The look of horror on my face said it all. I was so ashamed. Alan had known all along, but he hadn't said anything. My life reeked of booze. I had really screwed up, left a good husband, and lost my daughters. True to his word, Alan advised our girls to keep in touch with me. He was right. I had a lot of work to do to get them back. Gradually, they began to come to me without compulsion, and sometimes they even stayed overnight. One evening, as I drove the girls to their new home, I asked Alan if we could have a little chat. He got out of the car with me. I turned to face him. Lauren told me you know about Dan and me. I'm really sorry, Alan. You've been a good husband, and you didn't deserve anything from me. I was just an ungrateful, selfish bitch, and I got what I deserved. He only nodded. Why didn't you tell me you knew Alan? Maybe you could have stopped me early enough to save our marriage. By the time I found out, it was too late for that. When did you find out? I caught you with your boss when you snuck out together at the office Christmas party last year. I didn't say I saw you. After that, I did some digging and found out everything you two had been up to. I blushed thickly. I was so embarrassed. I have to admit, it really amused me when you were stuck in Bali by yourself. Oh God, I feel so miserable. You must hate me. So why didn't you confront me face to face? I was very angry with you and wanted you to feel my resentment and get a little revenge. I did some investigating and found out that you're not the first secretary your boss has slept with. He actually has quite a history of grabbing and dumping. I decided that the best way to you was to just keep quiet and let events unfold. Knowing his past, I figured that if your affair remained a secret, he would probably keep you in suspense for a while and then eventually get tired of you and dump you for someone new. I was afraid that if I made a big scene, his wife would find out and divorce him. Then he would be free to be with you and you would probably go unpunished. I also figured you'd feel a lot worse if you thought I just left you for another woman. I must say that your strategy worked perfectly. You definitely got your revenge, Alan. My life has turned to shit. I guess in hindsight, I'm sorry you were hurt so badly. Well, to be honest, a little sorry. You don't need to apologize. It was my fault. I would have walked away from you if you had done what I did. In hindsight, I was just seduced by the excitement and got addicted to it. I tried to stop in the early days, but by then it was too late. I became so obsessed with it and consumed by my desires that I just forgot about you and my girls for a while. My anger has passed now, Amy, and I do forgive you. I've also become more philosophical about it. After all, I wouldn't be with Sophie now if you hadn't cheated on me. Yes, I know that's what hurts the most. Our marriage was difficult from the beginning, Sophie, so I don't think you're a bad person at all. Yes, you made a really big mistake, but he was a master seducer. You didn't get a chance to grow up properly, enjoy all the normal things teenagers do, and especially dating and figuring out who you really wanted to spend the rest of your life with. You weren't ripe for the picking and your boss picked you. You're probably right, Alan, but why did you have to tell the girls about him? It was too cruel. No wonder they hated me. I didn't tell them, Amy. They told me. What? How? They both came back to our old house unexpectedly and caught you two in the living room. Remember, right after we moved our stuff out? At first, I couldn't remember, and then I remembered with horror. What did they see? Pretty much everything, even Emma. Lauren described the event to me in quite a bit of detail. My whole body felt like it had fallen under and I started sobbing heartily, not paying attention to anything around me. I don't know how long I cried, but I realized that Alan had his arms wrapped around me, supporting me and holding me tightly against him, my head buried in his chest. The familiar feeling and smell made me burst into tears again. I was picked up in his arms and carried into the house and laid on the couch. I felt so awful. Everyone, including Alan's new partner Sophie, was so sweet and caring. She insisted I stay to calm down, and when I came to my senses, insisted I stay for dinner. Sitting at the table with his new family, Alan looked so happy. I had really messed things up. As I walked out to the car that evening, he put both hands on my shoulders. Amy, I don't want you to keep berating yourself and being miserable. We had a very rough start in life when we were too young to become parents and commit to each other for the rest of our lives. If you think about it, the most amazing thing is that our marriage has lasted this long, 14 years. It's a credit to both of us. Look at the positives. Our two mistakes resulted in two adorable daughters, whom we raised into two wonderful young women. It's a fantastic legacy of our marriage that can never be taken away. You're right, Alan. Speaking of mistakes, I have to say I've made another one. Sophie is pregnant, so we're getting married sooner than expected. You seem to be very prone to mistakes. You are a good man and a good husband, Alan, better than I deserved. I wish you well. I gave him a hug and a kiss on the cheek and then left. My seat was indeed taken. I hoped I could find another man as good as him, but there was little chance.
에필로그, Alan.
Why did I forgive her so easily? For several reasons. Because hate can consume you and make you bitter. Because she was still being punished regularly just by seeing me with Sophie. I had loved her once too, and our bond remained intact no matter what. Although I wanted to punish Amy, my real revenge was directed at her boss Dan, who had once seduced her and led her away from me. I hacked into his computer, sending him an email that looked like it came from Amy. It contained a hidden Trojan horse that gave me full access to everything. I discovered that he had been quietly and cleverly embezzling money from his former employer and was now playing the same game with his new employer. I collected a lot of evidence and sent it anonymously to both employers and to the police. At his trial, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. His wife supported him throughout the trial and then visited him in prison with his children. I went to see her and showed her incriminating evidence of his numerous affairs. She was furious and decided to dump him on the spot. To complete my revenge, I visited Dan in prison. He didn't recognize me at first. "Hi Dan, we've met before. I'm Amy's ex-husband. What the hell do you want, asshole?" "To give you messages. The first one is from my ex-wife Amy. She sends her regards and hopes you're enjoying your new home that I personally helped you set up." "What? You really should have called in the professionals to encrypt your computer. After I hacked into it, it only took me 15 minutes to unlock everything. I just couldn't resist sending it all to the police." After he stopped swearing at me, I said, "I hope you don't mind, but I also visited your wife and took the liberty of showing her all those compromising photos and videos I found of you and your girlfriends. I must say that she was very angry with you. She insisted that we get revenge and I couldn't refuse. I don't know why she wasn't enough for you. Nonsense. She wanted me to show you this." I spread the pictures in front of him. Sure, they'd been doctored with Photoshop, but he didn't know that. "She said to tell you that she'll never visit you here again, and you'll never see your children again." I gave her the name of my lawyer who is going to divorce your sorry ass. The look on his face was priceless. Yes, revenge is indeed a dish best served cold. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel. And the wife, who seemed devoted and loving, was hiding a secret about her lover that ruined their world. She cheated on her husband, fulfilling her lover's every wish. But what happens when the deception is exposed and she is left alone, lost in her own lying games? This is a story of betrayal and consequences. James fell in love with his future wife as soon as he got a new job. He was 25 and Emily was 20. She was working part-time while studying at university. The girl didn't take her colleague seriously. For a long time she refused him even an ordinary date. But later she gave up and did not regret it. James turned out to be a wonderful man with whom there was something to talk about. In addition, he was handsome and attracted the attention of the female colleagues. A year later, Emily found out she was pregnant, and later they had a beautiful baby girl whom her father adored. Neither of them noticed how 18 years flew by. Ever since Emily was a little girl, they had a friend, Vika, who had been friends since kindergarten. And they managed to carry this friendship through the years into adulthood. Vika had been divorced for a long time. She was raising her son Callie on her own. He had just recently returned from the army and decided to make up for lost time by attending university. James was used to his wife going out with a friend several times a week. Then they went to the gym together. Then to the movies. Then just sat at home and drank. When their relationship just started, still young James did not understand why his beloved did not devote all her free time to him. He resented Emily, quietly hated Vika. But over the years he got used to their relationship. Emily joked with her husband, saying that he was just jealous that he had never had such friends and never would. James understood that, to some extent, this was true. Their daughter had left to study in another city right after high school. She had always dreamed of getting out of her small town. And when the opportunity presented itself, she fulfilled that dream. As her daughter grew older, Emily had more time for herself. She always looked good, and James contributed to that in every way. He did not spare any money on his beloved. When the child became an adult, Emily started going to the gym for dancing and doing yoga. She visited beauty salons and spas more often than any other woman in her circle. The investment paid off handsomely. For her 40 years, Emily looked very attractive. It was this attractiveness that attracted the attention of Callie, Vicky's son. Emily came to visit them from work earlier than her friend and was greeted by a young man. They were drinking tea and suddenly Callie said, "You are very beautiful," a woman confused. It is one thing to hear such a thing from a husband or from men her own age, but another from a young man who knows a lot about youth and beauty. Emily was very pleased. Thank you, she replied with a smile. I remember when I was 14 years old. I like you very much. My first conscious love, you might say, the young man suddenly confessed. Goosebumps ran down Emily's back. Callie's confession made her feel uncomfortable. She felt as if she had become an unwitting witness to someone else's secret. She did not speak with him again, and she could not look him in the eye if she saw him again. She was embarrassed to admit even to herself that after that night, she constantly thought about Callie. She literally dreamed of the guy taking her with his strong hands and pressing his lips to hers. She went to see her friend less often. Emily began choosing times when Callie wasn't home. She was glad her friend didn't suspect anything, because she didn't want conflict with her. One day she did run into the young man, and he, after getting a moment when her mother had retired to the balcony for a smoke, asked Emily directly if everything was all right. "Are you avoiding me?" said Callie. They were standing so close that it took the woman's breath away. "No, you seem to think I just have a lot of work to do. I can't come to you so often anymore," she answered confusedly. Her lips stretched in an attempt to smile. Callie looked at her sternly with a kind of concern. It was obvious that the guy was nervous. The next moment made everything turn over in Emily's soul. There were butterflies in her stomach and her cheeks lit up with fire. Her friend's son kissed her, and she couldn't push him away. A week later, Callie called Emily and offered to come to him. His mother was out of town and he was home alone. Upon hearing this suggestion, the woman became angry, yelled at him, and hung up. For a long time she sat there, clutching the phone in her hands and breathing heavily. Did he really think she was going to drop everything and run to his bed? That day, Emily got off work early and an hour later was standing in front of Callie, who opened the door for her with a pleased look. Their meetings became a regular occurrence. Emily had a whole spectrum of feelings. She was worried about her relationship with her friend, which would definitely fall apart if she found out about it with Callie. She was ashamed of James, who naively thought she was being held up at work, when in fact she was basking in the strong arms of a young man, and she was searingly and passionately in love with her lover. Often they didn't get to see each other, and Emily tried to keep their dates in the afternoon on her lunch hour, so that James didn't suspect a thing. His wife tried her best to act as if nothing was going on. James, on the other hand, began to see that his wife was starting to look even better. Her eyes glittered and her manners changed. He admired Emily without knowing what these changes were connected with. Once lying in bed after another intimacy, Callie told his beloved, "Divorce your husband. Let's go somewhere together. I want to be with you." He was admiring Emily, and she saw it. "Well, yes, and your mother will kill us." The woman laughed, "And we won't tell her." After dialogues like that, Emily always wanted to break up with Callie, never to see him again or remember what happened between them. She and James had been together for almost 20 years, and she couldn't imagine life without her husband. Despite her feelings for her husband's lover, Emily loved him too and couldn't give him up. But their secret union could not exist happily ever after. Once again, when Emily ran away from work to fall into the arms of her lover, Vika caught them in bed. From what she saw, the woman felt ill, and her son had to hurriedly call his mother an ambulance. Shocked, Vika kept repeating the same thing. "How could you do this?" She looked at her friend with sad eyes, while Emily cried and begged for forgiveness. Callie sat silently in the kitchen, trying not to show his face to the women. He heard his mother say that Emily had to tell James everything, or she would. And the mistress cried and begged her not to. The cheater had to confess. She did not want James to hear about it from a third party, and pulling together the strength, told him everything. He at first didn't believe it, thinking his wife was playing a practical joke on him. But when he saw the tears in her eyes, he understood everything. They decided to save their marriage. They are family, they have a daughter. But after a difficult year full of scandals and resentments, they divorced. Emily's soul missed her beloved, and James could not even bring himself to go to the same bed with his wife. The daughter accepted their divorce, but the relationship between her mother and her peer was not. The woman was left hoping that after a while the girl would change her mind and resume communication with her mother. Callie transferred to a university in another city, and she and Emily moved away from their acquaintances and angry tongues. In the shadow of forbidden passions and hidden desires, fate gently wove her formidable net, drawing her into the arms of a dark conspiracy. The wife, surrounded by glittering illusions of her perfect marriage, suddenly plunged into a dangerous game of fate and began to cheat on her husband. But what happens when the curtain rises and the illusions dissipate, leaving her alone, broken and betrayed? In the following stunning tale of betrayal and experience, she will find the strength to rise up, pick up the pieces of her shattered life, and be reborn in all her greatness. Life in the quiet little village is always monotonous. There are no bright impressions. Everything seems to go on as if on a rolling basis. The villagers got used to each other a long time ago and have been pairing off since school. There is not much of a choice. They get married, have children, spend their old age, and then marry their children again, and everything goes in a circle. There is no news either, unless someone arranges it for himself. And the main event in my remote village was the sensational news that they will build a new factory. There was a lot of gossip talk. Few people believed in construction, but one summer evening trucks with building materials rumbled past. Machinery rumbled and a construction crew came. It was that day that changed my life forever. We were used to living in the middle of nowhere, in silence and complete peace. My wife, with her emotional and hot-tempered nature, had reconciled herself to the fact that no bright impressions were forthcoming. I did everything a husband should do, earn money, and help in the household. In the village, I am a reliable, strong, and hard-working man. She, like a cheerful dragonfly, was not very fond of work, but dreaming was hers. Dreamed of a city, of impressions, travel, and that I was ideal. Even at the beginning of our married life, Annie tried to diversify our life. She was having fun. But I was tired at work and could not reciprocate the mutual merriment. I was afraid to go into the city in order not to get involved in some interesting story, and also in order to save the family budget. So our family evenings were peaceful and quiet. However, on a quiet summer evening was the beginning of construction, where I saw him. It was the construction foreman who won her heart. I worked from morning till night, was tired, and didn't notice how my spouse was distancing herself. Without realizing it herself, I started going out into the yard more often to do garden work. But that was just the reason. The construction crew, whose foreman was Nikita, was clearly visible from behind a low fence. In the daytime, I would put on a cheeky sundress and go out to the yard to sunbathe and look at Nikita. He couldn't help but notice it. The girl's passion could no longer sit inside. She needed to attract his attention, so she put on short shorts, a top made a mischievous ponytail on her head, took a hose, and began to water the flowers. The effect was not long in coming. Nikita immediately walked over to the fence and a conversation ensued. "Does the construction noise bother you?" "No, not at all." My wife became embarrassed. "I do not pay attention to him." Very sweet and even coquettishly smiled and made it clear that she was interested in him. It was from that day that something broke in my wife. Deep sighs of regret burst from her chest. I did not understand what was wrong with her. When I asked her questions, she would answer that everything was fine. When I came home from work, I would automatically receive a kiss on the cheek and go to dinner. She understood that she was attracted to Nikita, and she could not overcome this desire. A few days later, Nikita asked I to show her where the stores were. She offered to go with him by car. But of course, she was very afraid of the trip. She understood that it was only a pretext, because she saw in Nikita's eyes the same fire of passion that had ignited in herself. But I went. When she first drove outside the village, the foreman turned off the car, pulling into the shade of the trees. And there she was, already feeling his hot breath on her neck. And so shy, I became bold and passionate, falling into Nikita's arms. And so the 2 summer months passed. When I left for work, my wife would meet Nikita's gaze. And later, they would drive together to the woods, where they would give themselves over to love. She couldn't think about anything else. And I began to notice her coldness and aloofness. Already lying in the arms of this foreman, I wondered what to do about it now. How to tell me the truth. Nikita promised to take her to town. He described in every color how they would live together and get married. The summer flew by. Construction was coming to an end, and I was making plans to move to the city. She wanted to go somewhere where emotion and fun beckoned to her. And with Nikita by her side, it would be unspeakable happiness. The construction was finished, and it was time for the young slave to return to the city. And I was waiting for a chance to confess to me, but Nikita stopped her. Sweetheart, I can't take you with me right away. I have some things to take care of, but I'll come and get you. But how can I be here without you? We'll keep in touch, and I'll be back very soon, and we'll leave together. And he left, and I stopped sleeping at night. She didn't want to eat anything, didn't want to see anyone, and I saw that and felt that I simply disgusted her. A week went by, but Nikita still didn't call. And then I began to notice that my wife was throwing up in the morning. And soon I saw a test in a garbage bag with 2 lines on it. I did not want to believe it, but I constantly cried and did not eat anything. Immediately, I decided to find out once and for all. And my wife confessed, told me in all the colors of his adultery, and even began to point out my shortcomings. I was furious and slapped in the face. It became clear that the child is not mine, but still did not want to believe in betrayal. But I was possessed by rage. I grabbed my wife and threw her out into the courtyard, threw a few things into her suitcase, followed her and closed the door. The grief-stricken girl walked down the street, and the fellow villagers looked after her. Many guessed about the young lady's violent shenanigans, but no one offered to help. Waiting for the bus, I went into town. She did not know Nikita's address, but she knew the name of a construction firm. She arrived in the city late at night and had to spend the night at the train station. In the morning, I went in search of her beloved. She found the firm fairly quickly. Nikita was there. He was surprised to see her, took her outside and led her away from the building. He was very angry. Why did you come here? I came to see you. You promised that we would. I'm married. I have a family and a life of my own. With you, I was only having fun. But we're having a baby. I don't want it. Get an abortion or tell your husband it's his baby. He kicked me out. He knows everything. I don't want to know anything. Bye. If you interfere in my family or seek a meeting, I'll go to the police. Nikita left, and I sat down on the bench and sobbed. She still had no idea what to do. She didn't know anyone in town, and no one wanted her. And in the village, life had come to a standstill. Money was enough for a communal room. The next day, the girl went in search of a job. She found a job at a hairdresser's as a cleaner. She worked during the day, but at night, she wept on her pillow and thought of her bitter fate. Anything always wanted to get out into the city, but not under these circumstances, and not at this price. I received a letter from my ex-wife in which she told me everything, apologized, and asked me not to file for divorce. But my decision was unchanged. After the divorce, she never contacted me again. And how is her life now? I do not know. Yes,